Well, Pilgrim, the time has come for yet another episode of the Top 10 Favorite and from what I believe are the best films by some of the greatest directors in all of cinema. Test show, I'm starting from 10 and then taking the cavalry with me, up to number 1. And hold your horses, dude. I've seen every film that is attainable of these directors, so I assure you heartily, every list here comes from truthful, passionate, and poetic accuracy. Ladies and gentlemen, do we have a special one today, for we are talking about one of the greatest filmmakers in all of cinema. And for this Irish-American Heritage Month, there's no one more perfect to talk about than one hell of an influential director like John Ford. Born as John Martin Feeney in Cape Elizabeth, Maine. Of classic Irish descent, of course, he had a good, decent upbringing, involved in sports, and the picture business came from left field when his older brother Francis became a vaudevillian actor, forming his own company and hiring Jack Ford on as an actor, and later on becoming one of his biggest directors. You can say it was off and running from there, making over 60 silent films, increasing his knowledge in film, getting to know D.W. Griffith, who was an influence, and then Universal Pictures boss Carl Laemmle, and the real scope of a rising star director was born in John Ford. Anyone who knows film in general, ladies and gentlemen, need to know the name of John Ford, for he has been described as the preeminent Western storyteller of classic Hollywood, the consummate visual stylist and master storyteller. He is one of the great artists like his contemporaries, Frank Capra, Preston Sturges, Howard Hawks, Akira Kurosawa, who all idolized him as well, who had such a stock company of actors from Harry Carey and his son, Jr., John Carradine, Ward Bond, Jane Darwell, Mildred Natwick, Vera Miles, Woody Strode, Maureen O'Hara, Henry Fonda, and so many more. But there's no other star that was practically more synonymous with Ford than the Duke himself, John Wayne, who made 12 films together. John Wayne always explained it well by saying when Ford pointed the camera, he was truly painting with it. Every single picture that he has made has a scope of a painting. His canvas is so bright, so clean, and many have often argued it has glorified and sought out a beauty and poetry of the American West. And ladies and gentlemen, you know without a doubt, comprising this list of 10 for John Ford is one of the most damnedest, hardest lists anyone would ever make. So I know I'm going to shock a couple people, that goes without saying, but every list I comprise, of course, trails every piece of skill, challenge, compromise, love, and passion that John Ford possessed at the time of making it, and that we, the audience, gained from experiencing them. It's a bit hard considering through countless reports how much of a hard-ass, bully, almost dictator-like director he was, barking out his direction most of the time, even leading to physically assaulting one of his main actors. I mean, this goes without saying, the man was not really a saint. However, in true John Ford fashion, I'll ask you, did you enjoy the films? Then what the hell more do you want? The countless filmmakers I will mention always come to appreciate and idolize Ford, for he gave such an image and powerful voice of America, more subjectively, the American people. As Orson Welles, one of the greatest artists of theater and film, has said, when he was asked, who are among the greatest artists of film, he replied, I prefer the old masters, by which I mean John Ford, and John Ford. So get your pistols ready, Pilgrim, as we talk about the top 10 best films of the legendary coach, the grand master of film, John Ford. Now, starting off at number 10, The Long Voyage Home. Oh, such a silent classic that's so damn moving, it's not even funny. Based on Eugene O'Neill's The Moon of the Caribbees, In the Zone, Bound East for Cardiff, and The Long Voyage Home, with Ford developing with his great writing partner Dudley Nichols, of course during the backdrop of World War II, with the sea crew on the SS Glencairn, transporting explosive ammunition from America to London. But the scare of air raid attacks and the men's own growing depression, loneliness, and sinking dreams could possibly cave them in. This film is so damn beautiful, so Irish, it should be celebrated. I mean, with the combo of Ford and O'Neill, you're bound to get something very Irish, aka very depressing. It also feels very much like a play. 4 plays combined into one, which I absolutely love. And Eugene O'Neill said himself it was his favorite film. The biggest component, of course, is not only its incredible performances from its cast, Ford's stock company, of course, Thomas Mitchell, Ward Bond, Barry Fitzgerald, Mildred Natwick, and you guessed it, John Wayne, pulling off a Swedish accent. The best he can. But it's really Greg Toland's gripping and haunting photography that really guided Ford's direction, which usually worked the other way around, obviously. But Toland was already such a legend behind the camera that he even shared top billing with Ford. The argument of Orson Welles being utterly inspired for the look of Citizen Kane from this film, using Toland himself, is totally valid. It wouldn't be nominated for 6 Oscars, such as Best Screenplay, Best Editing, Best Special Effects, Best Score, Greg Toland Cinematography, of course, and Best Picture of the Year, for nothing. Number 9, Ford Apache. The phenomenal collaboration between the John Ford greats, Henry Fonda and John Wayne, as rivaling commanders, one a respectful captain, Wayne, and one a victory-hungry Lieutenant Colonel Thursday, Fonda, who battle about handling the ongoing feud between the soldiers and the Apaches, with Thursday not giving a damn about the natives and letting his own ego get in the way. Significantly, this film is one of the greatest films that stands on the platform of pro-natives, which in all honesty, John Ford was. People forget that Ford was a Democrat himself for a long time, and though he hired Navajo actors to play Apaches, he always welcomed giving natives work. And with this one, he required 200 male Navajo actors and 100 female actors and children, with always big meals for lunch on set. The set obviously did not go without challenges and harsh working conditions. This is John Ford we're talking about. Even having his screenwriting partner, Frank Nugent, incorporate biographies for every character in the script, as detailed as their drinking habits, for God's sake. But Ford, more than anything, loved working on character development, and is visually here in this classic, especially with his beloved location he would use 8 times in his films, Monument Valley, located on the Navajo Nation land in between Arizona and Utah. It was a tough shoot for everyone emotionally, especially Jean Nagar, since he just married Shirley Temple, who was in this as well, in a great adult performance. And Ford obviously had a father figure relationship with her after directing her in Wee Willie Winky. So Agar got most of the brunt of Pappy, as they called him. But at the end of the day, we have a mesmerizing Western that to this day is regarded as one of the greatest Westerns ever made. It's so tragic and visually so stunning. Number 8, The Informer. Yes, indeed, the 1935 classic, which earned Ford his very first Academy Award for Best Director, and for such a bleak, dramatic thriller based on the novel of the same name by Liam O'Flaherty, with an Oscar-winning screenplay by Dudley Nichols, as well as an Oscar-winning performance by Victor McLaglen as Jippo Nolan, a down-on-his-luck drunken ex-IRA member who decides to inform on his comrade for 20 pounds so he and his girlfriend Katie can travel to America and start a new life. However, the IRA isn't going to give up that easy in finding the informer, which is haunting Jippo more terribly. It's always tough doing such a picture coming from the informer's point of view, especially given to the IRA's history, and in this case, more based on the Troubles movement, which was more an underground war in Ireland. But we, the audience, recognize how much of the Irish guilt really takes over Jippo, and how horrible he feels about giving up Frankie, played by Wallace Ford, who gets gunned down in such a diabolical fashion. That whole sequence, Ford shoots it with such horror and fast-paced hysteria, with Una O'Connor's screaming and the gunshots. It's brutal. Talking about brutal, we have another classic case of Ford reportedly abusing his lead star, McLaglen, with getting him drunk for the scenes that required more from McLaglen. Famous story was that Ford gave McLaglen the night off so he could rest up for the big trial scene being shot the next day. And Ford knew McLaglen was going to go out and drink himself crazy. And he did. So he arrives on set the next morning bright and early, and Ford continues to berate him. So McLaughlin's hungover self could just spit the lines out. Talk about really going method for this one. This was a classic case of Ford really pushing his actors, because in this case, he believed in McLaughlin very much as an actor, when McLaughlin didn't really believe in himself. So Ford felt he had to speak to where McLaughlin was to bring out the deeper layers of himself in his Jippo. Needless to say, The Informer still remains a 4-time Oscar-winning classic that continues to inspire filmmakers, even somewhat spawning such classics like Infernal Affairs, which then inspired The Departed, which also features its beautiful ending in one scene of The Departed. Number 7, My Darling Clementine. Hell yes, one of the greatest films of the classic myth and tale of Wyatt Earp, his brothers, Doc Holliday, and the town of Tombstone, based on the novel Wyatt Earp, Frontier Marshal. What's amazing is that John Ford actually knew Wyatt Earp, as he met him in the early 1920s at the end of Wyatt Earp's life. And Wyatt Earp would actually visit the sets of certain pictures Ford was a prop boy for, and he would bring him a cup of coffee to receive any authenticity of the setting of what they were filming. Sure, the film is inaccurate to the true story, as they all are, let's be honest. But with John Ford being behind the camera, you know you have utter poetry unfolding before your very eyes. Like every John Ford classic, his ensemble is utterly brilliant, with Henry Fonda giving one of his best performances as Wyatt Earp, Victor Mature significantly cast as Doc Holliday, and Walter Brennan as the Heavy? That's amazing. Yes, Ford was still the wild and wicked curmudgeon on set, angering Brennan and producer Daryl Zanuck with cutting more dialogue, showing, of course, less is more. But at the end of the day, reportedly, more of his lighter side began to show more and more. He would have a priest on set every Sunday for every religion when they had to shoot, so everyone could give in to their own religion, having communion if they wanted, which really is a lovely gesture. There's nothing better than that classic line of Wyatt asking Mac, "Have you ever been in love?" "No, I've been a bartender all my life." There's just so much of the West that is exposed beautifully here, with Monument Valley, of course, and some of the most gripping performances you've ever seen in a Western. It's no wonder why famed Western filmmaker Sam Peckinpah claims this film as his favorite Western of all time, along with Akira Kurosawa, Michael Mann, and Hayao Miyazaki, claiming it as one of their favorite films ever. Number 6, How Green Was My Valley. An absolutely gorgeous film which earned Ford his 3rd Oscar for Best Director, along with 4 other wins out of its 10 nominations, including Best Art Direction, Best Cinematography, Best Supporting Actor for Donald Crisp, and Best Picture, famously winning over Citizen Kane. Based on the novel, it's purely the sentimental Ford we still love seeing, about the Morgan family in South Wales, within a mining town, going through the turn of the century from the eyes and viewpoint of its youngest member, Hugh, played absolutely brilliantly by a young Roddy McDowall, with its subplots including his sister, played by Maureen O'Hara, in love with the town preacher, played by Walter Pidgeon. But will it ever come together? Will this family learn more about each other and really stick together as a loving family? I mean, this is certainly a personal film for Ford, as a lot of the sentimental films are for him. He, of course, never said that, but you always felt it on screen. Originally, this was going to be filmed by William Wyler, but he left the project to work on The Little Foxes instead, which worked out for Ford since he said the script was just as perfect as it could be. And Ford was no stranger to sentimental epic pieces like this. He added a lot of his touches, like Maureen O'Hara's veil lifting in the air due to the wind machine Ford brought in, to give it such a sweeping, picturesque feel. And then you see the uncertainty in her face after she just married, riding off in the carriage with her groom, and you only see in the background Walter Pidgeon standing and watching, then walking off in the distance. Ford was asked by his assistant directors if he wanted to shoot Pidgeon's coverage in that scene up close, and Ford just said, "No, the studio will only use it." So he was always a proponent for cutting in camera, which I always love. That's exactly how Peter Bogdanovich learned. I love that amazing interview that he had when he visited John Ford on set of Cheyenne Autumn. Just It's the most brilliant interview I think you would ever see from a director. But anyway, yes, folks, I love Citizen Kane more as a film, but I won't argue that this classic, claimed as one of Clint Eastwood's absolute favorites, deserved its win for Best Picture. Certainly for Best Director, indeed. It's indeed fitting to see how Ford claimed it, sometimes as his own personal favorite that he has done. Number 5, The Man Who Shot Liberty Valance. That's right, Pilgrim. The film that Ford had made with Duke, and the first film he made with Jeremy Starr, whom, yes, we're both too old for the roles. It's been constantly complained about for years, but at the end of the day, this was a collaboration we've been waiting to see, just like the collab between DiCaprio, De Niro, and Scorsese with Killers of the Flower Moon. Some of you may be surprised by this being in the top 5, but folks, this remains one of the great masterpieces of Ford's career. Yep, I said it. Combining such entertainment that's really fun at times, and then again, on the turn of a dime, very deep and poetically layered. We all recognize again the quiet power of this film, as it speaks on a political subject. As the amazing filmmaker Sergio Leone calls it, pessimism, to stand on certain principles, then to have it wiped away, and then believing you achieved something nasty, but perhaps righteous, to then having the legend printed when it becomes fact. It's all incredibly fascinating and remains a big topic in film classes to this day. Ford apparently had a ball directing this film, whether it was loving the work of Lee Marvin as Liberty Valance, and yes, he is fan-frickin-tastic as Valance, or it was verbally abusing Duke continuously on set. Many say it was because Duke didn't use any of Ford's work on Duke's movie, The Alamo, which he produced. And it's also believed the studio wanted Duke in the picture, and Ford almost resented the fact that it would be Duke to make this picture possible and successful. So Ford just let him have it the most on the set, which really hurt Duke. The black and white, though, is perfectly used for this picture. More legends around the campfire on that subject as well, with perhaps the studio was cutting costs, which explains its soundstage location, not Monument Valley for once. But also Ford's preference stating, in black and white, you've got to be careful. You've got to know your job, lay your shadows in properly, get your perspective right. But in color, there it is. Oscar nominated for only Best Costume Design, this film still has such symbolism. Don't always listen to what hard-boiled Ford would say, that he didn't care about that. Because if he didn't, why does Edmund O'Brien's Peabody always quote literary classics like Shakespeare? And quite frankly, it beautifully shows the end of the heroic myth in the West, right there on screen, destroying and dismissing what heroes are made of within the West. There's just nothing like that whole sequence where Peabody's office is torn up by Valance, Peabody is presumed dead, Stewart changes his tune in gunning down Valance. They meet outside the saloon, no score. All right, dude, right between the eyes. And then told again from Wayne's point of view. It's so freaking great and gripping. Some say Ford was phoning it in on this one. I say, as well as thousands of others, he was simplifying himself. That actually matched up the times of what a powerful Western could do within these times of the early 60s. With a damn good song by Gene Pitney, too. Ah, such an iconic picture, Pilgrim. Number 4, Stagecoach. This may be incredibly surprising to some of you, with it being in the top 5. But folks, John Ford would not receive his second Oscar nomination for Best Director if this was not such an amazing picture that's still studied in film classes today, receiving 7 more Oscar nominations, including Best Picture of the Year. Released in 1939, one of the absolute greatest years of cinema, if not the greatest, with what? Wuthering Heights, Ninotchka, Mr. Smith Goes to Washington, Goodbye Mr. Chips, Dark Victory, Wizard of Oz, and of course, Gone with the Wind, which swept most of those awards. This Western was one of 3 amazing classics Ford released in this same year. This one still holding such power. Based on the short story, it follows a group of strangers with all different and specific characteristics and backstories being transported on a stagecoach through dangerous Apache territory. It's a classic character study with such amazing visuals, quintessential Ford, and it's amazing to think that this was not perceived as a guaranteed hit. producers really didn't believe Ford would make a successful big-budget A-rated Western, since he hadn't done one since the 1920s. On top of casting B-movie actor John Wayne as the central hero, producers ordered him to cast Gary Cooper and Marlene Dietrich instead. But Ford, in his infinite wisdom, or just straight-up brass balls, wouldn't budge, and he kept his major stock company with John Carradine giving such a seedy and horrible performance, in a good way. He's just great. Louise Platt, Claire Trevor in her Oscar-nominated performance as Dallas, gosh, he's incredible here, and Thomas Mitchell's Oscar-winning portrayal of the drunken doctor. We can always count on every ensemble piece to be at the top of the game, even if Ford taunts and abuses you, like clockwork. They say it's all for character development, to really get inside the time setting and environment, which makes sense, but Jesus, man, wouldn't be done today. You all know that. The first film to incorporate his masterful capture of Monument Valley with some of the greatest damn stunts you've ever seen in a Western. Stuntman, former rodeo vet Yakima Canute is literally the unsung hero of this picture. And with that major stunt, hopping from horse to horse on that stagecoach, to then being dragged under the coach in between the horses, holy shit, it's nail-bitingly excellent. When Canute finished the stunt, he ran over to Ford asking if he got the shot. Ford just replied, "I'll never film that again." Ford had strong feelings of the West, clearly, but only from what history had apparently given us, which is why the film still receives controversy today, because of the insensitivity and treatment of the Navajo in this film. Just being mindless, murderous savage. And yes, we all know it's wrong, but it makes us examine character in this case. And we should leave it at that. There's always room for progression. And sure enough, it is here and climbing. When examining the symbolism, critic Robert Pippin described it perfectly as the ensemble's inner conflict is a mythic representation of the American aspiration toward a form of politically meaningful equality. Even if each interior shot of the stagecoach looks awkward as hell, because it seems like they're not really looking at each other. This is one of the major complaints director John Carpenter always voices about, in why he can't stand some of Ford's pictures. But in my opinion, Stagecoach holds such a high mark in reviving the Western genre in a huge way that, of course, the look and style of it captivated a young Orson Welles to achieve such imagery for all of his films. Number 3, The Grapes of Wrath. Okay, as said before, my friends, these top 10 were extremely difficult, but the top 3 is excruciatingly tasking. But The Grapes of Wrath is obviously one of the most powerful pieces of filmmaking we would ever find from the master, John Ford. This was the first film I ever saw of the great John Ford, and it was after this masterpiece where I knew I had to remember this man's name and his influence. Based on John Steinbeck's iconic Pulitzer Prize-winning novel, We Live with the Joad family, stricken with poverty in their home state of Oklahoma. But after the bank seizes their home, demolishing it, the family decide to migrate to California for a better life, led by the recently paroled son, Tom, played utterly amazingly by Henry Fonda, in what should have been his Oscar-winning performance, in my opinion. But his BFF, Jimmy Stewart, earned it for The Philadelphia Story. You all know that story. John Ford took this story extremely seriously, even though his bullying style of direction, as co-star John Carradine would put it, wasn't absent. He still gave moments of such sincerity, such passion, and blunt elegance with the action of this family. One thing he made sure of was banning any trace of makeup for the actors to give that accuracy and authenticity. Photographed by the legendary DP again, Greg Tolan, the use of black and white is utterly iconic here, especially during the gorgeous moment of Ma holding the earrings, looking in the mirror, and the look of diminished hope in her eyes, and that classic memorable scene where Tom tells Ma he has to run. Wherever there's a cop beating up a guy, I'll be there. With Tolan using a little lit match under Fonda, creating such a caved-in space, there's a little glimmer of hope coming from Fonda's eyes. It takes my breath away every time I watch it. Of course, with McCarthyism on the rise, people feared producer Zanuck and Ford would be communists, given to its pro-union theme. But World War II helped eliminate those accusations, given to how service of country, service to the American people, needed to be taken seriously to heart and soul. Audiences, critics, and studios alike were utterly surprised at how sensitive a final product would be produced from a hard-ass director like Ford. But as I said, Ford was not so much a curmudgeon that he forgot the love of people and how the human spirit can stay strong through such challenge. Nominated for a total of 7 Oscars, receiving 2 for Jane Darwell's beautiful performance as Ma, and John Ford's second win for Best Director. The Grapes of Wrath is one of those amazing book-to-film adaptations that is near perfect as a film, capturing the essence and grip we need for this story to ring true, without it draining us, thanks to the power and leadership of John Ford. Number 2, The Searchers. Like I said, this was horrendously hard, folks, and it's hard to even talk about this film, especially within today's culture and society. Most audiences absolutely detest this film because of its clear examination and outbreak of racism and violence, which John Ford never liked shooting, just to let you know. Specifically from our central character, Ethan Edwards, played viciously and mesmerizingly by John Wayne, and honestly, his best performance. However, most film historians and scholars, filmmakers alike, still love, respect, and appreciate this film just from a filmmaking standpoint alone. And when you examine just the filmmaking style, folks, we all cannot deny how powerful of a film this is. Based on the novel by Alan LeMay, screenplay by Ford's consistent screenwriter, Frank Nugent, we have our quote-unquote hero, Ethan Edwards, Duke, returning home to his brother's family after the Civil War. And after more battle, there's nothing that gives him more pleasure and more of a peaceful spirit than to be home with his family. But then unexpectedly, cattle are stolen, so Ethan goes after to find them, only for us to discover that it was just a ploy from the Comanches to raid the home. Spoilers if you haven't seen it, but it's quite needed for the plot. Ethan returns to find the home in flames, his family killed, and the 2 daughters kidnapped. Thus begins the search. Ladies and gentlemen, after multiple viewings of this film, yes, I get enraged by the behavior of our leader here. How much hate, how much racism fills his veins with his drive to kill every single Comanche and rescue his niece, who is later portrayed by Natalie Wood. Yes, very much of its time for white female actors to portray different races, but I still stand with the thousands, countless filmmakers and historians, and call this film a masterpiece, just as the same way I call Taxi Driver a masterpiece. We're not expected to absolutely love this character of Ethan. It is an examination of character. Audiences already grew to love John Wayne up to this point, no matter what, because those were the kind of lovable, hard, brave cowboy soldiers we all grew to love. So Ford and Wayne really took a risk at expanding such a horribly vicious character and his intentions, granted fueled by revenge, but with much deeper abhorrence, especially the extra dose of direction given by Ford to Wayne, saying that his character may have had an affair with his brother's wife, and Debbie may be his own daughter. That'll definitely give an edge to your character's vengeance. And according to the author, this was common practice of abductions and racism within the West. So the narrative isn't anything new, but its execution is something jaw-dropping, mythical, and captivating. Ford was so proud of the project that he even requested a TV presentation of their behind-the-scenes featurette because of such care and work went into this film. This was the first film that would feature John Ford's quintessential and iconic eye patch, since his eyesight was already starting to go. When you just look at the VistaVision, the wide landscape shots at Monument Valley, when Ethan is plotting with poetry in the snow, this is the kind of poetry that comes out of Westerns, and why Ford was the master at not glorifying the hard, hate-fueled West, but contrasting the hate that was embedded with these characters with such a gorgeous backdrop of the West. Seeing for the first time the elegance of the West, its location, its native ground that tells us to empathize with the natives. But we also see the genuine plight and empathy out of the Americans. There are so many layers to it that it's just so exciting. This would not be one of the greatest Westerns, if not argued as the greatest Western of all time, if Spielberg, George Lucas, Martin Scorsese, Jean-Luc Godard, John Milius, Paul Schrader, and more didn't think so. When you even have Oscar winner director David Lean watch this film on repeat to get the inspiration of the landscape for his little film called Lawrence of Arabia, that's a huge thing. You read every critic circle poll, every magazine, they always hold The Searchers as one of the absolute best, and it really is because of John Ford's masterful take of soldiers after war in their home West setting and driven to obsession. What a masterpiece. And now, Pilgrim, here are some honorable mentions for you. Mr. Roberts. Okay, I know you all are shaking your heads in disbelief, but hear me out, folks, because this is an interesting one, and such a tragic one, honestly. Based on the novel and then the play, which Henry Fonda originated on Broadway, here he returns to his Tony Award-winning performance as Mr. Roberts, a lieutenant who fights for his crew on the naval ship against the tyrannical and yet ridiculous captain, Lieutenant Colonel Morton, played by Jimmy Cagney. Rounding out the cast, of course, is Jack Lemmon's brilliant and hilarious Oscar-winning performance as Ensign Pulver and William Powell as Doc. So this should be an amazing experience, right? Wrong. At this time of the early 1950s, Ford was already in such a horrible decline, drinking, smoking, more and more, that he was getting even more belligerent on set. So much more uncomfortable that he was at odds with Fonda and Cagney. One day on set, Ford and Fonda got so angry at each other that Ford punched Fonda out, ending their 16-year friendship together, even though Ford apologized to Fonda later. Ford then had to leave the production for his gallbladder surgery, which Mervyn LeRoy and the playwright of the damn thing, Joshua Logan, took over directing and completed the film. The film, at the end of the day, is a great and enjoyable film. Even though there may be some incomplete things about it, it still didn't stop it from earning its Best Picture and Best Sound Oscar nominations. Yeah, I know you can credit Joshua Logan and Mervyn LeRoy for completing the film and for their work and input on the final product. Even Fonda requesting Logan reshooting a lot of Ford shots. But we still owe credit to Ford, even though he disowned the film. He still created the environment for the film, using his naval connections to give accuracy. He welcomed improv from Cagney and Lemmon, and it still is a fantastic showcase of acting that I hold dear when I first saw it when I was about 12 years old. The film still shows Ford's credit as director at the end of the day with LeRoy, so we can say his input is still present. Young Mr. Lincoln, which was the first film Fonda and Ford collaborated on, and was a lovely friendship while it lasted. Here you can see the majesty that Ford brought out of Henry Fonda as the young attorney Abraham Lincoln. Russian director Sergei Eisenstein saw the cut of this film and wished so much that he made it because of how much tributing love and admiration he gives the character of Abraham Lincoln, and in such a tasteful way, not in a sappy, overly sentimental way, that you can tell how much Ford loved Lincoln and what he stood on. Fonda didn't even want to play the role because he felt as if he would be playing Jesus himself. But after seeing himself in full makeup, he believed and trusted in Ford's guidance, which brought us a fantastic portrayal. Though it's not my favorite Lincoln portrayal, I think that will always go to Daniel Day-Lewis. Thank you very much. Ford brings out the greatest in his actors, which is so strong here. She Wore a Yellow Ribbon. Picture number 6 between Ford and Wayne in part 2 of Ford's Cavalry trilogy with Fort Apache and Rio Grande. As expected, one of the most beautiful Ford pictures of his whole career, with the amazing help of DP Winton C. Hawke, earning his rightful Oscar for cinematography here, capturing even more of a gorgeous essence out of Monument Valley, which was a bitch to capture with all the overtime he was tasked with, causing him to sue with the Cinematographers Union. John Wayne gives another one of his best performances as Captain Brittles on the eve of retirement, but he has one last mission to end a battle between the Cheyenne and the cavalry, and he takes along with him Abby Alshard and her niece, Olivia. Stock company members, of course, Mildred Natwick and Joanne Drew, with Olivia catching the eyes of Jean Agar and Harry Carey Jr. with her yellow ribbon. Wise decision to cast Wayne here to give him more capacity as an actor. Ford was convinced to cast him after he saw Duke in Red River and said, "I didn't know the big son of a bitch could act." Another amazing example of the horizon captured beautifully by Ford, and amazing that this was only the second film Ford made in Technicolor. The Last Hurrah, which certainly has been named by many John Ford fans as one of his best, about an Irish-American politician, Frank Skeffington, played brilliantly by Spencer Tracy, who's up for re-election as mayor, does whatever he can to win the title again. Based on the novel, it's always amazing that the city here in the film is an unnamed New England city, but it's clearly Boston, given to how much it's based on Boston's own former mayor, James Michael Curley. Curley actually tried to stop production because of how much he felt it would hurt his reputation, but the show must go on, of course, and it certainly must go on with such a brilliant cast, as always, with John Carradine, Donald Crisp, James Gleason, Basil Rathbone, Pat O'Brien, and leaving such a mark that a 1977 TV remake with Carol O'Connor would be made. Originally, Ford wanted Orson Welles to play Frank, or even Jimmy Cagney, but you got the best of both worlds with Tracy, starting his career with Ford, doing Up the River in 1930, and then now literally Tracy's Last Hurrah here, which he felt this would be for him. It's no wonder why Ben Mankiewicz and his father Frank, who was a press secretary in D.C., claimed this as one of their favorite John Ford films. Sergeant Rutledge, which I absolutely love, folks. It certainly has some issues considering more of the emphasis on Jeffrey Hunter's character, Lieutenant Tom Cantrell, who defends his first Sergeant Rutledge, a recognized black soldier of the cavalry, played amazingly by Woody Strode in his first collaboration with John Ford, on trial for allegedly raping and killing a white girl as well as her commanding father. This courtroom western is told through flashbacks with the testimony of Rutledge himself being so powerful. The question, especially at this time of 1881, is the innocence of Rutledge being such a heroic and monumental figure in the Black Cavalry. But then again, right here in the South, according to the white majority, the color of his skin apparently speaks for the crimes alone. This film is only talked about between film historians and film buffs, and also a lot on TCM, thankfully, but should be talked about even more in film classes and the public, for it has some of the most powerful images Ford has ever given on film. How he tackles racism and the country's horribly skewed and blind viewpoint is something that was a bit ahead of its time at 1960. And in a Western featuring a black protagonist in such a commercial film was groundbreaking indeed. And in filmmaker Robert Townsend's words, featuring the first black superhero, which with how Ford paints Sergeant Rutledge, it's so true. How he ties his scarf around his neck with the classic horizon of Monument Valley, of course, is so epic. And Woody Strode easily gives the best performance he's ever given, especially with his cross-examination on the stand, with his beautiful mini monologue, standing on his feet, declaring, "He's a man." It's truly fantastic and should be another example of how Ford was fighting for race consciousness within this world, fighting to end racism and hate by holding the mirror to society. Number 1, The Quiet Man. How can it not be denied, folks, as not being the best and most endearing piece of work in all of John Ford's career, not only being his most personal and his own personal favorite film he ever made. He has certainly said that for a lot of his films indeed, but there is something utterly precious and valuable about this film that thousands upon thousands, including Martin Scorsese, myself, and every Irish family across the world, see in it. Filmed on location in the lovely little town of Cong, County Mayo, Ireland, practically the land time forgot, because when the crew and cast showed up, there was no access to electricity. So the producers had to bring electricity to this town in order to shoot within the exteriors. Producers, including Ford and his producing partner for years and years, Marion C. Cooper, forming Argosy Pictures and working with Republic Pictures, normally made B-westerns at the time. They only agreed to produce the film if all three main subjects, Ford, John Wayne, and the beautiful Maureen O'Hara, made a western first. So Rio Grande was made, which is an excellent film as well, so they can go on to do The Quiet Man. Everything about this picture, folks, is just dazzling. Everything about it works tremendously. Winton Hawk's Oscar-winning cinematography with that gorgeous Technicolor. It apparently rained a lot. Must be Ireland. But yes, indeed, it helped that Technicolor tremendously. Victor Young's luscious score capturing the essence of Ireland, the fictional town of Innisfree, which the town would rename it if they could for sure. If you have seen that lovely documentary, Dreaming the Quiet Man, it's incredible with how this film planted such a monumental haven for this town, creating such a museum of nostalgia, tributing this film with the Quiet Man Bridge, various statues of Wayne and O'Hara everywhere in the town, and the Cohan pub becoming an actual pub after the film turned it into one, just for the film. This film is also such a family album, a precious home movie featuring Ford's older brother, Francis Ford, who would often play bit roles in all of his films, along with Ford's son, Patrick, doing the stunts for Victor McLaglen in an Oscar-nominated performance, mind you, not to mention Duke's and Maureen O'Hara's children, featured as extras in the big horse race scene. You can say Ford never felt closer to his Irish heritage than he did while making this film, because John Wayne's character is practically Ford, as John Wayne is coming back to his Irish upbringing, even though he's been raised most of his life in Pennsylvania. And so John Wayne's character has to fight, literally, to be taken in by his own people. And John Ford almost felt that way too, spending all of his time in America. And once he returned to Ireland, he felt he had to fight to be welcomed back home. He was unfortunately so depressed while making this film because there were so many production setbacks coming from Republic Pictures while he was so sick, which had Duke take over second unit direction at one point. But being the ultimate leader, he knew he had to stick it out because it was a picture and environment that meant the world to him. Yes, the film features in today's society's mind anti-Irish stereotypes, which, yeah, the big man-handling scene in the very end, which is in adherence to the Irish tradition of the Marquis of Queensberry, can be seen as controversial. It must be a John Ford film. But Ford blends a nice tone of comedy in it because we know Mary-Kate Danaher is such a feisty redhead, and she loves having a battle. It's obviously much different if she didn't, but her character loves the scrapping. So what's the problem? The film surprised everyone, receiving 7 Oscar nominations total, winning 2 of them for Hawk's photography, and Ford's 4th and final Oscar for Best Director. When the picture was finished, Ford wrote, "Galway is in my blood, and the only place I have found peace." And it certainly makes sense, given to the fact that this film brings peace to thousands and millions, practically every St. Patrick's Day. The legendary director's thumbprint is present in so many filmmakers, other legends we idolize and love today, especially Spielberg with his own personal tag on Ford in his autobiographical film, The Fabelmans, with Ford being portrayed to perfection by one of my favorites, David Lynch, telling the young aspiring director, "When the horizon's at the bottom, it's interesting. When the horizon's at the top, it's interesting. When the horizon's in the middle, it's boring as shit." Priceless. Also, Spielberg's tribute to The Quiet Man, even in E.T., when Elliot swings the girl in class like Wayne swings O'Hara with the luscious wind blowing through her hair and that passionate Hollywood kiss. It's timeless stuff that makes us love the classics. Not only was the artist known for his narrative films, but known for his gripping and groundbreaking documentaries he made while serving as a commander in the Navy, 2 of which won the Oscars for Best Documentary, The Battle of Midway, and Best Short Subject Documentary, December 7th, using actual footage that he captured overseas, including Omaha Beach, on D-Day. He actually continued service during the Korean War, being promoted to Rear Admiral, which he held in the highest order. He was the very first recipient of the AFI Lifetime Achievement Award, the Presidential Medal of Freedom, Purple Heart, and has inspired Ireland to create the Johnford Ireland Symposium, which is a film festival dedicated to John Ford's influential style and films. The man had two loves in his life, his wife of 53 years, Mary McBride, and Katharine Hepburn, whom he had an affair with while making Mary of Scotland. But with his influence on film, you would say he loved pictures even more. Without him, we would not have all the greats in cinema today. We would not have the power of filmmaking without him, because he stood on style, on simplicity, on real action, on character, and on the human soul. His contemporary Frank Capra, one of my dear favorites, has described John Ford perfectly as half tyrant, half revolutionary, half saint, half Satan, half impossible, half possible, half genius, half Irish, but all director and all American. No petty fingers, if you please. But tell me, my friends, do you agree with my picks? What are your favorite films of this legendary master storyteller, John Ford? Please list in the comments below. I always love hearing your thoughts, my friends. If you like this, please click like, subscribe, and please, oh please, check out the Patreon channel and follow me on Instagram as well as Spotify for more content to come. You know you can vote on the polls posted on the Patreon page when you subscribe for as little as a small cup of coffee a month. Just ask these patrons right here. You really won't regret it, folks. But in the meantime, my classic film-loving friends, thank you so much for watching, and always, always keep the classics alive.